Thank you and welcome to the Executive Member for Transport Decision Session, 11th of May 2021. This is the first formal council meeting in West Offices since March the 19th, 2020. And as you can see, we will be following all the COVID precautions as far as possible. I would just say that we do actually have some physical members of the public here as well as some calling in. And obviously, as this is a first for us, we'll try and keep things going as smoothly as possible. For the benefit of the people who are in person, we're not expecting a fire alarm, but if the alarm does go off, then the exit route is as where you came in, but obviously please maintain social distance and keep everyone as safe as possible. I've kept this on for the sake of demonstrating that we are taking all the relevant precautions, but I'm in the interest of clarity, I think I will take it off during the conversation, and likewise the public speakers are welcome to take their masks off while they're addressing the meeting, but obviously if you're moving around, please use the mask still. So item 1 is declarations of interests. I have no prejudicial interests in the agenda items before me. However, in the interest of transparency, I would also like to note that in relation to item 11, that the petition that relates to affects an area in my ward, and it's a petition, as it says in the report, that I presented to council in October 2020. In relation to item 9, I have had meetings and conversations with officers, Guildhall ward councillors and York Civic Trust to understand the views and concerns that are around that particular item. And finally, on item 10, I've had meetings with Micklegate ward councillors, the Environment Agency, officers and representatives of Cycle Campaign on and off for over a year in order to understand the concerns about possible diversion routes. I want to put on record that I'm no longer a paid up member of York Cycle Campaign, and I've never been in a formal position within the group, so I do not consider I have a prejudicial interest in that item. Next item is item 2, the minutes of the meeting of April the 13th, 2021. Just a couple of minor corrections to note, please. Paragraph 73, Johnny Hayes was a public speaker. There's a point where it should read scope rather than scoop. I think it was referring to the scope of the report. And just to avoid any doubt, I think paragraph 76, rather than saying are due to be implemented, it should read may be implemented. That's just for some clarity regarding to the foot streets area, which are referred to in that report. So with those two changes, I'm happy to approve the minutes as amended, which takes me to agenda item 3, public participation. And I'm very glad to say that we have managed to keep on track with this meeting despite the changes in the last few days to the regulations, which meant that we have had to come back to physical meetings in council office rather than the use of virtual meetings for Zoom. So the sort of public participation is a combination, a hybrid, I think is the term, a contribution to the items on the agenda today. And each speaker's got 3 minutes to address the committee. I'm trying to give a warning of 30 seconds before the end of your time. So the first speaker, I've got 2, I'm going to take them in the order which are on my list, so I don't miss anybody. I've got 2 speakers who are on the call, and then I've got some speakers who are here in person and back to a few on the call. So in the past, I might have taken them relating to each item, but given the technical complications and keeping people hanging on the phone for a long period of time, I think we do need to have all the public speakers at this point in the meeting. So the first public speaker I've got relating to the TSAR signal refurbishment, Bootham, Gillygate, Junction, which I think is item 9, is Tom Franklin. Is Tom on the call?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes, thank you. Would you like to address the committee? You've got 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm speaking as a member of York Cycling Campaign. First, let me welcome the consultation on the new local transport plan. We do need a new plan which will actually implement the transport hierarchy and the policy of removing non-essential traffic from the city centre. But I am now going to turn to the proposed replacement of traffic lights at Bootham Bar. The current recommendation is a disaster. It is not in line with the council's own traffic hierarchy, nor is helpful in reducing the amount of traffic in the city centre. It would also be the most terrible finish for the active transport corridor on Shipton Road, Clifton and Bootham. The report notes that there will be delays for motorists if option B is implemented, and therefore it should not be done. But the current layout has had at least 5 and maybe as many as 20 collisions that were reported and leads to delays and dangers for both pedestrians and cyclists. It seems that inconvenience for motorists is considered more important than safety of cyclists and pedestrians, despite the city's transport hierarchy. It would also appear that modelling does not assume any evaporation of traffic, with people choosing alternative methods of cycling and walking become easier and safer. This traffic light replacement is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to do something that will improve York for the multitude of pedestrians that are crowded into the fumes, especially at the corner of Gillygate and Bootham. I urge you to reject both the current proposals, postpone the decision until at least September or when the new local transport plan's form is more evident, and consider something truly radical that will help move us to a safe city where more people choose to walk, cycle and use the bus. You should consider an option that makes Gillygate one-way or bus only as the first step in stopping cross-city traffic in York. This could make the city centre much more attractive for both residents and visitors and be an important part of building back better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin. So the next speaker I have is Lee Spracklin, also referring to the Gillygate Junction. Is Lee there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, thank you. Would you like to say your contribution?
Thank you, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute on this important issue. I've lived in Gillygate for 14 years. Just declare my interest. I'm not a member of any political party or organisation that might have been involved in this consultation. I speak purely as a resident of Gillygate. Something needs to be done about Gillygate is such a common phrase that you can become totally immune to hearing about it. It's what I've heard almost on a weekly basis for the last 14 years. During the pandemic, despite the difficulties we all faced, the much reduced traffic meant we started to smell grass from museum gardens, the blossom in the springtime, and the eye irritation that I mistook for hay fever over the last 14 years seemed to mysteriously disappear. We also had the option to talk to our neighbours across the street for the first time ever, and the novelty was strange. Now we're back to two-way gridlocks, streaming eyes, and not really able to see or speak to a neighbour unless you're virtually on top of them, which is not recommended during social distancing. We're always told that Gillygate is such an important part of the inner ring road that very little can actually be done about it. Yet we see on Gillygate cars parked all day and all night, causing traffic build-ups and disruptions in traffic, so we wonder where its importance is then. Overnight, it often turns into mobile discos or an overnight racetrack, which we all saw in the news, I'm sure, last week. Doesn't seem to be as important in those two instances. So when I was faced with the initial good feeling that something needs to be done, the good feeling very quickly disappeared when I was faced with the false opposition of options A and B. Improve the junction and do nothing at all about air quality, the status quo, or improve the junction and possibly make the air quality worse. Is that really a choice? When I borrow a car, I see the need for option A, whereas option B is better for my mostly pedestrian journeys and undoubtedly improves the area visually. But where was option C, D, or E, the ones that include a genuine and real commitment to improve air quality? Air quality on Gillygate is so bad now. Your own data shows this. Every elected member and officer of the council involved knows how bad the air quality is on Gillygate.
30 seconds.
Option C and D need to be talked about. Traffic reduction and air quality need to be priorities, and soon. We cannot go on like this. I talked to a lovely couple on holiday from China in 2019 from a very industrial area. They thought York was lovely, their holiday let on Gillygate was great, but they wondered how I coped with the poor air quality and why, of course, I didn't wear a face mask. We need to pause and research different options that offer residents, businesses, cyclists and pedestrians a real meaningful set of choices that include a commitment to improving air quality.
Thank you very much for your comments. That was just a little bit over, but I'll let you off that one.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
So the next speaker I have is Roger Pierce, who is here in person, I believe. Do you want to take a seat, Roger?
Oh, dramatic flourish. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. So you've got 3 minutes.
Okay, jolly good. I speak on behalf of Walk York, which is an entirely new organisation. We don't launch or dive at dawn until tomorrow. Our way of working is obviously to recruit members, and we've now got 60 without launching. We notify them of council consultations, describe what those consultations say, and ask them to respond. We don't tell them what our view is. So in respect of the Bootham Gillygate, the view overwhelmingly was in favour of option B, the change option, if you like. I hope I've got the numbers correctly, but a substantial number were also concerned about they preferred the no change because of their concerns about air quality. I suspect this is the dilemma you were also facing, sir. So my suggestion, speaking on behalf of the group, is really to ask for a deferral. And the reason I ask for that is that the calculations of loss of capacity are critical, aren't they? Your officers have calculated 30%. I know learned friends take a different view. And I learned recently that in any event, changing to the new type of puffin lights increases efficiency and therefore raises the capacity of junctions anyway. What I'm suggesting, sir, is that you defer a decision until next year, or certainly later this year, until the new post-COVID traffic levels actually become apparent. It seems to me that at this moment in time, you shouldn't make a decision based upon 2019 traffic data, because it will change, but none of us really knows how. And a small reduction in car traffic use vehicles would actually enable option B to be carried out. Could I also raise a subject which is relevant but raised by members, which is the change from the far side to the near side indicators? In particular, our blind members or partially sighted members say that they rely on the use of the knurled knob below the control column. What they find actually is with the new style junction, people tend to cluster around the control unit, which means they can't get at the knob. And furthermore, they point out that there's only one knob, and often in the city centre, 2 or more partially sighted people. They also point out that, that guide dogs are trained to respond to the far light. So if you're blind with a guide dog, this is ignored. So in all these cases, what I would ask you to do is to defer. And when come forward with a much better designed system, particularly, that overcomes the key difficulties which increase social contact, particularly at the Gillygate, Petergate junction. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. So the next speaker I have is Robert Gordon. I believe he's on the call, is he?
Thank you, Councillor.
Yes.
I would like to speak on the issue of the Gillygate Bootham Junction. I would like to recognise the extensive effort that your President do to respond to this consultation and speaking at the meeting today, and the breadth and depth of their comments, first-hand experience and expertise. It seems very clear to me that many people support improving provision at this junction for sustainable, non-polluting modes of transport that will shift more journeys away from the private car and help to make York both zero carbon and a pleasanter place for everyone to live with cleaner air, whatever their modes of transport.
But we're struggling to hear you a bit. I don't know if you can speak a little bit more clearly.
Sorry, is this a bit better? I'll continue. However, the options presented in this paper highlight many of the challenges that will have to be tackled over the coming months as York's local transport plan is updated. Option B is certainly preferable in many ways. It vastly improves the feel, appearance, safety and attractiveness of this part of the city for pedestrians and residents. It also provides a far more appropriate setting for the historic Bootham Bar, as opposed to the current unsightly street clutter, and improves safety for cyclists, although perhaps not enough. Whilst there is some agreement that a proportion of traffic will be displaced to other parts of the network, sorry, there's a plane going overhead. Whilst there is some agreement that a proportion of traffic will be displaced to other parts of the network and that some will evaporate, as is well documented in many transport studies, it is unclear, however, what exactly the impacts will be on the length of queues of vehicle traffic at the junction and how this might impact on the already bad air quality on Gillygate and on journey times for a number of key bus routes. Nor is it clear what other measures could be used to control and reduce traffic queues on Gillygate, or what further options, such as a bus gate in one or both directions, could be explored in conjunction with option B to address many of the concerns raised. Gillygate is a fantastic street and is also home to around 60 households, including those on residential side roads. Many people feel it could be even more fantastic, both for residents and for traders, with less traffic, less pollution, and more space to create a people-centred rather than traffic-centred street. For example, with room for seating, cycle racks, and street trees. These options need to be explored further in conjunction with residents and traders. Less traffic on Gillygate would enable better provision for cyclists too.
About 20 seconds.
On that basis, I believe a decision should be deferred until further modelling work can be done. Further discussions can take place as part of the local transport plan process and investigations carried out into the options for significantly reducing traffic on Gillygate. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, and apologies for we couldn't quite make out what you were saying at that point. So the next speaker I have is Tony May, who I think is here in person. It's on behalf of Civic Trust, I should say.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you say, I'm speaking on behalf of York Civic Trust in connection with the consultation on Bootham Bar Junction. It's clear, looking at the results, that respondents are deeply divided and in some ways inconsistent in their responses. 55% favour reallocating road space to pedestrians and cyclists, yet 59% of those stating a preference prefer option A, which fails to do this. If you look at their responses, 68% of the reasons given for opposing option B relate specifically to congestion. And these may well have been influenced by the officer's statement in the consultation document that it would cause, and I quote, congestion across the network. That was the only negative statement on either option in the consultation. And it does now seem to have been exaggerated. The second point is that the council, in promoting the dualling of the outer ring road, stated that a key objective is to, again I quote, encourage traffic out of the city centre. Yet no attempt has been made yet to assess how this junction would operate when dualling is complete and traffic levels are reduced. Fortunately, as we've heard, the council now plans a major engagement programme to understand the community's aspirations as a first step to developing the local transport plan. And at the same time, as we know, there is a plan to do some strategic modelling of options which will include the Outer Ring Road. And we're delighted that the council has invited us to contribute to that process. By August, therefore, we will have a much clearer understanding of the community's priorities for transport and of the likely demands on this junction. We therefore strongly urge that the decision on this scheme be deferred until September. We understand that this might delay implementation by 3 months, but we know that this design has been underway for at least 3 years now, and a 3 month delay seems a small price to pay if we can get the design fit for the future. What we would like to suggest is that the council uses the intervening period, first of all, to look at other means of reducing pollution in Gillygate, many of which are already available, others of which we've heard from other speakers this morning. Secondly, to use value engineering to reduce the costs of the alternatives, which seem to have been increasing significantly.
30 seconds.
And thirdly, to seek ways of reducing the impact of the junction on the heritage surrounding Exhibition Square, which is potentially the finest square in York. And we'd be delighted to help with any of those. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The next speaker I have is Neil McFerrin on the same item. Not sure if I pronounced your name correctly.
Close.
I have the same problem with my surname.
I always say, and my friends call me Neil.
Okay.
Because I was born in Scarborough, not in Ireland. But... So thank you very much, Councillor De Gaunt, for this opportunity, and congratulations in having the honour of hosting the first face-to-face meeting. We hope that this will be one of many more where public consultation is permitted. So I'm Neil McFerrin. I am the chair of the St Leonard's Place Museum Street and St Leonard's Mews residence group. There are 41 residential properties in this group, all of which will, to a lesser or greater degree, will be affected by this decision. Many expressed concern to me that the whole process was difficult because it was so heavily weighted in favour of one option. And when I pointed out to them some of the potential flaws in that, they were not at all pleased. On balance, at the moment, we would favour option B as a group. But like other speakers, I think what we would suggest is a deferral until such time as better information is available and better opportunities for consultation are available. So my property looks out onto the top of the Minster. And so in 30 years time, oh sorry, no, 30 years time, in 2030, when I look from my property to the top of the Minster, will I have the vision that was afforded in the paper attached? I sincerely hope so. I think it's vitally important that the sector of the city undergoes radical improvement. The problem with some of the views expressed in that article and that submission to this organisation, it didn't take into account the increased population of the city, which potentially is bound to cause even greater congestion. And so there is work to be done. The current arrangements favour the cyclists, the car user, the freight user, against the interest of pedestrians and cyclists in this area. It is dangerous to watch people actually trying to cross these crossings and to watch cyclists trying to manoeuvre around the use of the particular junction. The other thing is that it's confusing. We witness daily close calls where people are in the wrong lane, try and cut across, and generally have problems. Simply replicating the current junction will do nothing to improve the situation in this junction. We see regular congestion within St Leonard's Place and Museum Street.
30 seconds.
We also notice that most of the problems in Gillygate are caused by inappropriate parking. there is an opportunity here to improve a major area of the city, and we simply must look at producing better facilities for cyclists and pedestrians. During the summer months, when we welcome our visitors to the city, the key problems of congestion are to do with the use of the pavements. There simply often is not enough room for pedestrians on our safe pavements. They often can be witnessed actually walking out into the road, and it's a dangerous and unsustainable situation.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you very much, Councillor.
contribution. And my next speaker, I'm trying to keep things moving as fastly as possible. Martin Farrington is wanting to speak on item 10, I believe. Take a seat. We didn't account for the cleaning regime in the 3 minutes. Do you want to make your contribution? Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, I'm speaking to you today as a homeowner on Scarcroft Road concerning item 10. The proposal that you are considering will bring traffic some 30% closer to our homes and could increase traffic noise for residents, which in all likelihood often exceeds levels recommended by the World Health Organization. Increase the impact of traffic vibrations on our homes. Put pedestrians at greater risk, including school children, who will lose the safety buffer of parked cars next to narrow pavements as traffic is made freer to move more quickly. Mean a loss of parking amenity and inability to load and unload in close proximity to our homes, and give rise to difficult sweat paths for right turns off Scarcroft Road, increasing the potential for accidents. It is especially concerning that the recommendations you are considering today makes no reference to the temporary nature of the proposals being considered. Should any proposals be made permanent, there is a risk of the reduction in the value of our homes. It is no coincidence that the properties on the Scarcroft Road and Upper Price Street Junction with no on-street parking to their frontages are all homes of multiple occupation. Put simply, the council's proposals are creating a huge amount of disquiet and anxiety for me and my neighbours. I have provided a number of written comments on the council's report, so in the interest of time, I would like the council to provide a written answer to the following questions. Can the council explain how it plans to make a material amendment to the Environment Agency's diversion route through a transparent, plan-led process and thereby maintain the integrity of the planning consent recently approved? Will the council clarify that through the 2-year planning process, it did secure all the necessary, relevant and reasonable measures from the Environment Agency? If it did, can it explain why further substantive works are being considered just a few weeks later? Conversely, if it didn't, can the council explain to residents why it signed off the Road Safety Audit Stage 2 and determined the diversion route as safe for the number of cyclists expected? To be equitable to all parties, will the council agree to look at the options brought forward by residents as well as cycling campaigners? Will the executive of the council make clear to residents that the proposals are temporary in nature? And if the proposals are not temporary, will the council clarify how it will set the baseline for all environmental factors that may be relevant to any future Part 1 claims? In light of the question above, can the council clarify why it is choosing not to rely on the review and monitoring process for the diversion route it agreed with the A less than 3 months ago? Surely, with public engagement, this was designed to address those concerns now expressed. Thank you
very much. Thank you for your contribution. We can now go back to the phones, I believe. The next speaker I have is John Singleton, who is speaking on the same item regarding the cycle route. Are you there, John?
Good morning. Good morning. This is John Singleton. Thank you for letting me speak this morning.
We can hear you. Thank you.
You can hear me, good, excellent. I'm speaking as a resident of Scarcroft Road, and I'm very much in the fronting where the car parking will be suspended for 18 months and quite close to where the proposed traffic island will be. Naturally, I'm concerned that effectively 10 car parking spaces will be removed and the knock-on effects that this will have. Car parking in Scarcroft Road is already quite difficult at night and at weekends, and it's not uncommon to have to park several hundred yards away from our home. Removing 10 spaces will make this significantly worse. And I would say that it won't just impact the people that live on Scarcroft Road, but it's going to impact the people who live on streets to the north and south of Scarcroft Road as cars are displaced. I consider that the proposal that we should be able to park in zone R49 doesn't really adequately address the matter, because my observation is that the parking in Millfield Road and Fawcett Street is also very busy, and there are very few spaces available at nights and weekends. I have to accept that where there are safety concerns for road users, cyclists, pedestrians, then it is appropriate to restrict car parking. But my concern is that the present proposal for a traffic island on Scarcroft Road is both unnecessary and, frankly, potentially dangerous in itself. I say unnecessary because this morning I've seen a number of cyclists come down Millfield Road, turn left into Scarcroft Road, and seem to have no difficulty or being exposed to any danger at all. I say that the present proposal is more dangerous for this reason. The main problem on Scarcroft Road is the speed at which traffic goes along Scarcroft Road, despite the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, which is largely ignored. The only thing that slows traffic down on Scarcroft Road is the presence of parked cars, which causes, when there are cars parked on both sides of the street, causes cars to slow down, to stop, to wait for cars to come the other way.
30 seconds.
It seems to me that if you remove 10 parking spaces, then that is likely to accelerate the speed at which traffic passes along Scarcroft Road. Thank you for listening to what I have to say.
Thank you very much. The next speaker I have on the same topic is Joe Skinner, also on the phone. Are you there, Joe?
Hello?
Hello.
Yes, I'm here.
I can
Hi,
hear you.
thanks. Yes, great. Thanks very much for the opportunity to contribute today to this really important issue, which once again is about the proposed cycle route crossing Scarcroft Road and on item number 10. So I just want to start by being absolutely clear that I am speaking as a resident of Scarcroft Road, but also as a cyclist. I have lived with my family on Scarcroft Road for 15 years. My children have grown up in this area and have gone to the local schools. And alongside my neighbours today, we are all good citizens who make a contribution to the community. I object to the complete lack of consultation and clarity for residents, especially around the change from the Thorpe Street route to the Millfield Road route, and the very, very poor communication that we received from City of York Council back in April. The scheme poses a danger to pedestrians and cyclists, and I speak as a cyclist with some authority on that. Notably, the increase in traffic speed that the removal of the bays will bring about, cars closer to the pavement, around 3,000 children getting to school in the local area, and of course, the increased noise levels that the cars, travelling cars closer to our properties will bring about. Losing the bays for up to 18 months, I do not consider to be of a temporary nature, so I absolutely object to the classification of this as a non-key decision. I absolutely want you to review your plans and to come back to us and engage with us, as you should have done in the first place, as people who have lived, who live, work on Scarcroft Road, and to listen to some of my neighbours who have spoken with some authority today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think the last speaker on the phone is Tim Phoebe from York Cycle Campaign.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you, Tim.
Right. Thank you for allowing us to speak. Terry Avenue has been described as one of the best examples of city centre cycle routing in the country. It's used by about 750 cyclists today. That's probably an underestimate. So an awful lot of people are going to be using the diversion routes either side of the river when it closes for 18 months. So any diversion route should be a good quality standard, safe for people to use of all types and size of bike. And we just don't think that especially the present crossing of Scarcroft Road meets that criteria. The stagger is a left to right stagger, which does not follow the latest government advice in Local Transport Note 120, cycling infrastructure design, because it means the right turns have to be made in the middle of the road. You might have an island behind you, but you'll have cars coming towards you. Not really suitable for children cycling to school or whatever. So we're suggesting on busy junctions, separate and protected cycle facilities in line with LTN 120, and also that a junction assessment should be carried out of all the cycling movements there and to aim to get them more protected. We suggest in our note that we've sent in with for this mission that either temporary traffic signals are looked at the junction or a protected two-way cycle track on the southern side, which would mean less car parking loss, which is an issue that's come up today. Also, we noticed on the diversion route, Millfield Road, so it's wider and less steep for somebody, say, a disabled cyclist on a tricycle. There's a pinch point at the top, and it's used as a rat run in the evening peak. So maybe looking at closing that to through traffic, creating a low traffic neighbourhood. Cycling Friends willing to work with the City of York Council to improve the diversion route on this very important route into York. And I must declare an interest. I closed it in 1991 as a City of York highway safety engineer. I used to live in Scott Street, so I have local knowledge as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. That concludes the public speakers. So I will now move on to agenda item 4, which is relating to the data platform. Thank you for your contributions. So James Gilchrist, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. So the report author has asked to withdraw this item as they want to include some further advice on the report before it's formally considered. So I think we can withdraw that report and defer it.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy with withdrawing this item from discussion. I think it does need a bit more information included within it, so that will give us the opportunity to bring that forward. So then the next item is item 5, York's response to a national bus strategy, page 15 to 22 in the report.
Thank you. So the government launched the national bus strategy on the 15th of March, and the objective of that strategy is to make large-scale improvements to bus networks. The strategy sets out two options: either the development of an enhanced partnership between operators and the local transport authority, i.e. the council, and that needs to be done by June this year. And then that partnership develops a bus service improvement plan, which needs to be in place by October this year. Or the other alternative is that local transport authority determines that it will franchise bus services. I suppose technically there was a third option, which is to do nothing, but that places the COVID bus service support grant, which covers the gap between fare income and the cost of running services, in jeopardy. And that's obviously crucial to the solvency of all our bus operators in the city. So we've discussed our approach with neighbouring authorities, as a small proportion of our bus network crosses the border into neighbouring authorities. And we're all in agreement on the approach, which is to develop an enhanced partnership as a first step, and a bus service improvement plans that reference each other. So each authority would develop its own bus service improvement plan, but they would talk to each other. Although the DFT is yet to provide detailed guidance on what actually needs to be included within that bus service improvement plan, York is in a strong position compared to many local authorities. The Quality Bus Partnership and the Better Bus Area formed in 2014, under which our bus operators have voluntarily contributed over £1 million to assist with traffic management measures in the city. It's also seen improvements in things like timetables and joint ticketing. The Quality Bus Partnership has also allowed the introduction in York of many of the aspects of best practice cited in the National Bus Strategy, joint publicity and an information and a passenger charter. So what you've been asked to do today is, as the executive member, is endorse the approach of an enhanced partnership, but given the importance of this, refer it to executive on the 20th of May as a decision of key importance, with a plan to bring the bus service improvement plan for adoption by executive in September.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say that this does provide a really useful review of the excellent public transport reputation which York has built up over decades, in spite of the deregulated pattern of provision. For 2 decades, we've been, as you've said, worked with a Quality Bus Partnership and also a strong political steer towards achieving our unique bus-based clean air zone, which has achieved an exemplar electric double-decker fleet on the Park and Ride service. Recovering from COVID will be both a challenge and an opportunity for us to establish a high-quality bus network, whilst not wanting to rule out franchising as an option. Paragraph 20 to 22 does advocate reforming of an enhanced partnership for York, which I would certainly support as the most sensible approach in the circumstances of the tight timelines that we have to achieve to maintain the funding which is essential for our bus services. But I also ask officers, as you referred to monitor closely how the decisions in neighbouring authorities such as West Yorkshire might have on services such as the coastliner, which provide a good regional service, including through York, but also important service for some of our residents in particular parts of the city. I'm also aware that we'll be making use of expertise of operators, residents and organisations such as York Bus Forum to shape the service that best meets the needs of residents, visitors and workers in and around York. So with that, I'm happy to approve the recommendation, which, as you said, will be referred to the executive for the meeting the 20th of May as a key decision. So that moves us on to agenda item 6, which is the scope for the York's 4th local transport plan.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the report before you today sets out the approach to the development of the Council's new local transport plan, Local Transport Plan 4. The current local transport plan at a strategic level actually runs for another 10 years, although it does now feel out of date given the changes the city has experienced, such as e-scooters. The implementation plan for the local transport plan has expired, and much of it has been delivered or is in the process of being delivered. The proposed approach is therefore to review policy and strategic element of the local transport plan this year, with the aim that it will be adopted by the end of the calendar year. This will then set the targets and seek a mandate to start working on developing policies and projects to deliver those targets. A number of sub-documents will need to be developed to support the delivery of that policy. In an ideal world, they would follow on afterwards, but items such as the bus service improvement plan, which you've just considered, will need to be developed alongside some of the policy elements. As the previous item, given the importance of the local transport plan to the city, the executive member is asked to endorse the approach and refer it to the Council's executive for consideration as a key decision.
Thank you. The scope for the 4th local transport plan is before us, and I'm proud to be in a position to finally launch this work, although it was delayed by the COVID. We had sort of earlier plans to move it more quickly, but it is good to see it's moving forward. And the original local plan, as it said on the cover, was 2011 to 2031, which had a detailed implementation plan, but still governs the broad strategy which we're following today. But it obviously couldn't reflect significant changes that took place in the intervening years. So a new community stadium, a new local plan which envisages 15,000 new households being built in the next decade, and the technological changes such as electric vehicles, e-scooters, and climate challenge, which requires us to dramatically cut our carbon emissions. So I am happy to approve this, as you said, moving forward. The scope, there is a timeline at paragraph 29 of what we're aiming to achieve, and I'm sure that will be subject to further reports as we move forward. So the next item I've got is item 7 is the LTP4 engagement strategy.
Thank you. So in April, the council's executive approved a council-wide resident engagement strategy. And this was to reflect and ensure a joined-up approach to policy development, and it ensures consistency and alignment of our ambitions for the city. And that's particularly important for the local transport plan and its relationship with the economic strategy and indeed the carbon reduction strategy. The report before you sets out in more detail than the executive report did how this joint plan will be deployed in terms of engagement on the development of the next local transport plan. The involvement and influence of residents through the stages required to develop the local transport plan is obviously key to its success. As you've referenced, what is laid out in the annex shows the timeline in the ongoing engagements, which have a direct correlation with the development of the local transport plan, both in terms of the economic strategy and in terms of the carbon action plan, but also in terms of the projects in the city and the engagement around foot streets in the city centre, for example. The recommendation is that you approve the engagement plan set out at Annex A, which secures involvement and influence of residents through the stages required to develop the local transport plan for.
Thank you, and I think this is this is a critical strategy which for the next couple of years is going to set the pathway for what happens in the future of our city post-COVID. I would just sort of put on record that the engagement we had in for LTP3 was extremely extensive, with significant input from residents. There's a 14% of all households returned a questionnaire with broad support for the approach that was taken within that. So I think that is a good solid base, although obviously as said, times have changed in terms of technology and so on. But this time we are hoping to adopt a different approach which will have a holistic engagement to cover economic strategy, carbon reduction and local transport. Transport represents a third of our carbon emissions, and compared with other sort of changes we might make in our life to achieve that carbon reduction, such as changing our heating systems, this is one where behaviour change can be the most cost-effective pathway to lowering emissions. So switching to electric vehicles and e-scooters, bikes and walking for local trips benefit our health and air quality, as well as cutting carbon. And this work provides us the opportunity to identify barriers to change, take actions that might be most cost effectively achieved, and make it more attractive to more people, as outlined in paragraph 9, and with the details in the annexes. So I very much welcome this report, which, as you say, is going to be taken forward in parallel with consultation on the economic strategy and the overall recovery, as well as carbon reduction. So I'm happy to approve that item. The next one we have is agenda item 8 on e-scooter and e-bikes trials. People, just as a preface to this, people may or may not be aware that we are in York, one of a number of cities that have a trial for a year, which was approved by the DFT prior to any intention they might have, for government might have to deregulate electric scooters. So at the moment, I'm perhaps pinching some of your thunder, but at the moment they are operated by a private operator, but the agreement with the council was that the chosen operator was the best one to meet our needs, and they have worked very closely with us. So, James, do you want to?
Thank you. So, as you've alluded to, this report relates to the trial that the Department for Transport has allowed local authorities to engage with. The decision today actually relates to expanding the service area that e-scooters and e-bikes can be hired from, and officers are recommending to include areas outside the outer ring road for the first time. The trial of e-scooters and e-bikes has been operating since October last year. The e-scooters have been introduced in a phased approach, gradually increasing the service area and number of scooters available. Currently, they're available in many of the wards within the outer ring road. During the first 5 months of the trial, almost 12,000 trips were taken, with over 3,750 individuals signing up to the service. That's seen a total of 78,000 kilometres travelled via e-scooter in that 5 months. During this period, there have been no incidences reported where an e-scooter has been involved. There have been a few isolated issues with antisocial behaviour around some of the e-scooter parking bays, and TSAR have addressed these with both the council and with North Yorkshire Police to resolve those issues. TSAR have also been undertaking a number of measures to ensure a COVID-safe service. They've increased the cleaning regime and the equipment issued to users. In addition, they've offered discounts and incentives to key workers, including the NHS. There's been ongoing engagement with the city's partners, including the universities, North Yorkshire Police and the hospital, to ensure effective communication with progress of the scheme and resolving any issues quickly. The phased introduction, I think, has been vindicated in the way that we've been able to resolve those issues and the way we've engaged in terms of expanding the area. And that phased approach would also be applied to areas outside of the outer ring road. So the proposed parking spaces and routes for e-scooters and e-bikes to use would go through the council's existing approvals process to consider appropriate and safe routes from these areas to the city centre, particularly in terms of crossing the outer ring road. The proposal is that the e-scooters and e-bikes would be trialled in Poppleton, Haxby and Wigington, and the ward councillors in these locations have been consulted and are supportive of trialling e-scooters and e-bikes. As is currently the case, ward councillors will be consulted on proposed parking bays, and the e-scooters and e-bikes will be trialled here for 4 weeks. The trials will then be reviewed and will inform the process for expanding to other areas beyond the outer ring road. Expanding the trial area to include most areas within the outer ring road, beyond the outer ring road, offers benefits to York. For those using the service, this will increase connectivity of the city for riders, increasing the area available to ride and ease of hiring e-scooters and e-bikes. It will also provide additional sustainable travel options to a greater area of the city. The exec member is therefore asked to approve option 1 to expand the service area that e-scooters and e-bikes can be hired. And I would just say at the end, the trial is actually coming to an end with the DFT, but they are seeking to extend that trial. And we have a report before executive because they made the decision to engage in the trial to extend with the DFT's extension as well.
Right, thank you for that update. So yes, I think we are very fortunate in having selected TSAR for this trial as a company with significant experience from other European cities. Gradual extension has allowed us to sort out problems and other road users being able to adjust to expecting to see e-scooters as well as e-bikes sharing the road. Conversations have already been established, the likely demand, as has been indicated, with ward councillors and parish councils in the Poppleton and Haxby and Wigington areas. So a couple of sort of technical points to make. The geofencing, which applies to the scooters, allows them to be limited in terms of where they can and can't go under power, and so that they can be limited to suitable locations, and the views of ward and parish councillors are taken into account in that consideration. I do believe that they have a potential to replace increasing numbers of local car trips, and demonstrate the value of through this proposal, through looking at more rural settings. I mean, in that context, as you said, we have looked at sort of possible routes that connect through from those areas to the city centre, but are off-road routes that they can use to connect that area. And it's also worth pointing out that uniquely TIA have a fold-out helmet which the users can choose to use if they feel that that's going to help to keep them safe on the journey. I would also thank the officers who've written this report for the excellent equalities impact assessment and the amount of work that's gone in to mitigate any negative impacts on residents with disabilities, and the fact that there's continual monitoring of the impact of as the scheme is rolled out, as James has just referred to. The fact that we've had the opportunity through different phases of lockdown and gradual extension over the past sort of 8 or 9 months does mean that we haven't had the problems that have been experienced in other cities with these introduction of these scooters. So I'm happy to approve that report. So that takes me on to agenda item 9, which is the Bootham Gillygate Junction, and obviously we had quite a few speakers on this item as well. So James, do you want to introduce?
Yeah, so the traffic signal asset renewal scheme, which is what TSAR stands for, is primarily about replacing existing life expired equipment. It's a maintenance programme about replacing assets before they completely fail. In that sense, it's about asset management and no different to repairing potholes. It's about ensuring that the asset is fit for purpose and protects all users. This site, in terms of its traffic lights, currently ranks 6 out of the 124 junctions on the list of signals requiring replacement, and has been on the programme for a number of years. Whenever we develop a traffic signal asset renewal scheme, we look at opportunities to improve the junction in question. Through this, we've seen improvements at other junctions, such as Warmgate Bar. This location is incredibly challenging due to the road layout and constraints of the space, and the fact that it acts as a key route for all modes of transport. An option to improve the junction has been developed, but the impacts on traffic flows are detrimental, and the consultation and report are both clear that our officers estimate that at 30%. And that's included in the gating strategy, which limits flows to this junction by controlling flows at previous junctions. Details of the public consultation are within the annexes to the report. The majority of the public consultation responses were not supportive of the alternative layout. As a result, officers have drafted the recommendation, noting that there may be future changes, including more radical options that emerge through the local transport plan. But on that basis, officers would recommend a like-for-like replacement, because the traffic lights are increasingly likely to fail in the near future. But to mitigate the risks of a change coming as a result of the local transport plan, and I think I've just clarified that whilst we may have the strategic element of the local transport plan by autumn this year, the projects that underpin that are likely to follow later on, probably the year after. And after this year, it's difficult to predict, isn't it? But I think saying we'll have a plan for September is optimistic. We'll have a policy around local transport plan, not approval for all the projects. So officer recommendation is to do a like-for-like replacement, but install ducts to facilitate future changes should that be required. And that like-for-like replacement is also the lowest option in terms of the abortive costs. It doesn't prejudge LTP, and it allows that asset to continue working. The risk, obviously, is that the traffic lights fail. So the officer recommendation is therefore to implement the like-for-like replacement.
Thank you. Well, this obviously has had a lot of attention, and as you've heard, The Civic Trust has contributed and been in quite a lot of dialogue with officers, I understand it. So firstly, I would like to put on record my thanks for the comprehensive work that officers have done on this and on the two options. And also, I think that the registered speakers we've heard have amply demonstrated the challenges that we face as we seek to develop a sustainable transport plan to lead us forward towards a zero carbon by 2030, whilst at the same time catering for bus services, deliveries and other essential traffic. In terms of the two options that are before me, and I would say that acknowledge that officers have, before this report was written, there's been quite a lot of additional considerations in response to questions that I've raised, for which I'm grateful. Option A is a straightforward replacement of the traffic signal equipment as has been described, but does nothing significant for pedestrians, and it's stated in the report cannot provide safety improvements for cyclists using this busy junction. Option B is generally far more acceptable, as we've heard from most respondents, and I think the main deciding factor in terms of the response we've had was the impact that it has or is projected to have on congestion. I think if it wasn't for the concerns about congestion and air pollution, the vast majority of residents would be very much in favour of option B. And I accept that the more work needs to be done before option B could be implemented to consider more carefully the representations that we've had from bus operators about the impact it might have on journey times, and also modelling, as has been referred to by one of the speakers, the impact of post-COVID travel patterns. I mean, we have had, obviously we got some evidence of what happens post-COVID, but at the moment, particularly concerns about social distancing, wearing of masks and use of public transport will be impacting on the travel pattern that we are witnessing. And I think that we need to consider that, and also the shift which we hope to achieve towards cleaner vehicles. Obviously, electric cars are still only a very small proportion of the vehicles on the road at the moment, but in the coming years will be far more prevalent, and hopefully we will move towards areas of the city that are completely clear of any fossil fuel vehicles. I do have a number of concerns that remain outstanding. On paragraph 112, there doesn't appear to be any sort of equalities impact assessment comparing the two options. I'm aware that both of them are going to make improvements, will make improvements for pedestrian using the crossing, but I obviously wasn't aware until the contribution this morning about some concerns about the sort of equipment we use for the blind and partially sighted using the crossing. That's obviously one thing that does need to be looked at, and some further consultation with those user groups to make sure that whatever we've done with previous SAR projects, this could be an opportunity with such a busy crossing to look at different arrangements or equipment. So I think that does relate to that one would hope would be picked up as something an equality impact assessment would highlight between the two different options and other options we might have in terms of the equipment we're installing. On the survey data, I don't know, if, James, whether you have any other information on this. It's probably not really that crucial at this stage in the process, but there is reference in the report to the fact that there were 216 duplicate online responses, which were taken. It was decided could be included, which does rather, you know, obviously it's in the report, and one or two other people have posed that as something which is not clear. But I think the fundamental point is that in terms of the options that were presented and the online survey, which obviously had the biggest number of responses, option A had of the three options, when we have three options and the first past the post, if we know what happens, but the three options were option A, option B, or neither. Option A was still less than 50% of respondents actually wanted that option, and I suspect that there would be even fewer if it wasn't for the concerns about congestion and pollution, which is, you know, obviously subject to being quite a lot of discussion and potentially further modelling. So some of those saying that they wanted neither were saying that ostensibly because, I mean, I think it was about 50-50 percentage-wise of those who supported option B supported, who supported neither one were in favour of more radical solutions, or just didn't like option B. So this, in terms of analysis of the response that we had to the online survey, there is certainly an indication that option, as one of the speakers, I think it said, you know, option C, D, or E could actually be something which meets everyone's requirements, and given the once in a lifetime opportunity this potentially represents, I have concerns about moving forward with either of these two options at this point in time.
Can I just come back on the duplicate responses?
Sorry, yeah.
There were duplicate responses. Option A had 61, option B had 53, and neither had 27. It doesn't do anything massive in terms of the percentages. So in terms of the responses, for option A, you'd get 48.44. For option B, you'd get 32.75. And for neither, you'd get 18.81. But duplicate responses are standard, where you get many members of the household with the same viewpoint, obviously. I think the thing I would say is that I'm not sure it is once in a lifetime opportunity. I did hear a speaker say that, but if it's a scheme that comes out through the local transport plan as a priority, then obviously that's the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why officers have recommended the like-for-like replacement, because it doesn't prejudge what might come out when you do that wider modelling across the city and look at potentially more radical options even than option B.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that particular point in the report. I'm sorry it wasn't picked up sooner, but the other question that I have, well, as we've heard from speakers, there are concerns about the impact on cyclists using this junction. As the resident who lives nearby observed, there's quite frequently, shall we say, behaviour which leaves the observer concerned that there might be more serious consequences at the junction, not least the confusion at the two lanes emerging from St Leonards Place when, and have raised this with officers as a concern with when the left turn lane comes on, and people who were intending to go to Gillygate set off thinking that the lights are about to change for them as well as for the left turn movement. I mean, obviously, as has been stated in the report, option B removes that possibility, but obviously has other impacts. But in terms of the impact on cyclists, the report says that both score 0 under LTN 120, which is the government guidance which was published last summer for all schemes, all junctions which cyclists are allowed to use, not just particular cycle schemes. But I have particular concerns, the fact that this is the terminal point of active travel fund cycle routes down Shipton Road and Bootham. And if you ask anybody who's a cyclist, the point which prevents people from cycling is the point where it's only needs one pinch point on a route, which means that they will choose not to use cycle and will use a car or other means of transport. So there's certainly seemed to be a strong indication within the report as been referred to for about people favouring road space reallocation, although when they actually looked at the detailed design, then obviously they maybe gave a slightly different question, a different answer to the question than would be implied by the two options. So option A basically does nothing to improve safety for cyclists. And I have asked officers prior to this in briefings about advanced signal, which is referred to in the report, and option A, with the current phasing of the lights as they are optimised for vehicle traffic, would not allow an advanced green signal for cycles using the junction. And in fact, obviously the modelling might show that option A with advanced green for cycles is actually the same congestion impact as option B, in which case that would be the more logical option to go for in terms of the public benefits for public realm, for pedestrians crossing the area, and the general improvement to the whole area that would represent. I'm glad to see that you've mentioned about the option to put in ducting and avoid abortive costs. But I think, I mean, particularly given recent conversations, that I would be remiss approving something without knowing precisely what those abortive costs are. I think that would need to be in a report before me before deciding option A and option B. I'm aware that the significantly higher cost for option B is mentioned, but again, that is something which I think does need looking at, as has been referred to, the benefits of the public realm, which may be a priority not for the transport infrastructure, but a priority for us as a city and us as an authority. So the statements in the air quality aspects of it do serve to highlight our current failure to provide an adequate response as an authority to the air quality action plan. We've made big strides forward, I should say, with the clean air zone for buses. But if it's probably too early to say what impact that's had in terms of our air quality. I mean, I'm conscious that this particular route, the Park and Ride, is a Euro 6 rather than electric bus, but nevertheless, one would hope that the gradual extension of clean air vehicles generally would address some of those issues, but there's no modelling, and I'm aware of concerns for the residents living in the area in terms of which option we choose without that more detailed modelling and the picture which might emerge post-COVID as to whether we are going to see a significant change in travel patterns with far more people working from home than was pre-pandemic. So on balance, I have to agree with the proposed course of action which the Civic Trust put forward to defer this decision until September. I would like to see more modelling work that's clear objective of directing through traffic away from the area. Looking forward, obviously, has also been said towards what might be our decision in the local transport plan, might be opportunities that arise as we dual the ring road, if that's what we're going to do. But at the same time, we need to look at how we can prioritise bus services. I think that is a critical one, which I do acknowledge in the submissions. It's not acceptable for us to be disadvantaging public transport if there's any means by which we can avoid that. But at the same time, we should be tackling the air pollution at peak time and also potentially review the options already discounted in the report. I'm aware that this route, as I said, is potentially a golden opportunity to have a top grade cycle route all the way from Rawcliffe into the city centre through High Petergate, which then links to the north-south route across the city, which we've got via Deangate and round through Hongate. So that potentially would be one of our strategic routes in our local transport plan. And I wouldn't want us to be implementing something which means that we have missed an opportunity, particularly given the timescale which we are talking about, this being booked in for next year for the work to be carried out. I think it will give us the opportunity to have the first stage of local transport plan consultation, except that the more detailed work will probably follow on after that. But this would be see this project in the wider context of traffic reduction and road space reallocation around the city. I think this administration has to get to grips with the challenge of reducing traffic in York and not just electrifying it or moving it about in certain areas. I hope that officers, residents and businesses and all stakeholders are up for this challenge, which is going to be a vital part of our zero carbon pathway. So with that, I will move on to agenda item 10, okay. So agenda item 10 is the diversion cycle route for the work on the Environment Agency's about to start, I believe, next week is the latest date I've seen. They're actually working on Terry Avenue at the moment.
Yeah, so the Environment Agency have planning approval to undertake flood protection works, which involve the closure of Terry Avenue for approximately 18 months. A condition of that approval is to ensure the safe passage of pedestrians and cyclists between Butcher Terrace and the city centre by means of an approved diversion route, which is to be implemented prior to the commencement of the Terry Avenue closure. That condition has been discharged and the approved route makes use of the existing cycle route along Nunthorpe Grove, Thorpe Street, Upper Price Street, Signet Street and Swan Street. As an existing cycle route, it is obviously acceptable, but the closure of Terry Avenue for such a long period is likely to see an increase in use by active travel modes. Some concerns have therefore been raised by stakeholders who have suggested the diversion route has the potential for further enhancement. It is acknowledged that the current alternative route does have some constraints, primarily the crossing of the arterial road crossing points on Scarcroft Road and Nunnery Lane, which provide little or no assistance to cyclists. In addition, some of the signage for the route is either missing, is discontinuous, or is obsolete as it references the Terry's factory, which is no longer in operation. It's therefore considered appropriate to review the route and develop potential improvements. The proposal to implement on a temporary basis the alternative route and improved cycle crossing was shared with local residents who, as you've heard today, have serious concerns. Work to implement was therefore stopped within 4 days of them being notified so that this matter could be formalised with yourself to agree a way forward. Therefore, the proposal is to separate the options. Some of the existing signage could be improved now, and that actually doesn't require your decision. I could make that decision. As I've referenced already, the alternative route proposed does potentially give some benefits, even without the crossing on Scarcroft Road, and the cycle crossing on Scarcroft Road. It does give some benefits, that alternative route, because it reduces the amount of time cyclists needs to spend on Scarcroft Road and Nunnery Lane. So the report has been written, and I'll come back to this in a minute, the report has been written to suggest that actually that route could be implemented subject to a road safety audit. And then the third part of the decision is actually that the potential improvements to the layout for cyclists around Scarcroft Road is added to the work programme, formally reviewed and brought back to you as a separate decision. However, what I note based on the written responses and the discussions today is actually that alternative route, Annex B, which had already been discussed with the cycle campaign, is now being, an alternative is now being proposed. So my instinct is to say that actually there is a third option, which is to say you put the whole route and the crossing into the work programme, and we bring it all back to you as a separate piece of work. We take the opportunity to do any signing that we can. Whilst it's not within your purview, you need to be aware that we would work with my planning team as 3 conditions would need redischarging from the Environment Agency planning application. And those are condition 12, which is a temporary TRO, condition 14, which is a road safety audit, and condition 23, which is cycle diversion route. Conditions 12 and 23 require sign-off from the Chair and Vice Chair of Main Planning Committee. So my advice is you could either take the report as it's written, which is to implement the diversion as per Annex B, excluding any work to the crossing at Scarcroft, or and add that to a separate work programme. Or the other alternative is to say, actually, you want further work on the whole diversion route with the cycle campaign to discuss their alternative, which they've submitted in writing. And we consider Scarcroft Road in that. I have arranged a meeting with the residents next week to discuss in more detail those points.
Okay. Well, if those, thank you for that that update. Obviously, some of the information wasn't available when this report was written. And as you said, there was quite a detailed submission from York Cycle Campaign was with the papers I got on Friday, and they've got a variation of in terms of options for crossing Scarcroft Road that you might want to have a look at. So I'm happy to agree to the implementation with the variation via Millfield Road if that whatever process that needs to go through, but with a separate piece of work on the actual crossing. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I think there's 2 options really. I think one of which is we implement as per Annex B, so that becomes the signed route.
Is there a separate? Oh, yeah. I see.
So right. Annex B shows the route proposed, but actually we do that in a way that doesn't remove residents' parking. We don't implement the crossing at Scarcroft Road, and that retains it on the existing highway.
Right.
So it's not it takes a lot of the heat that you've heard today out of it, because it's not reallocating road space but it doesn't solve the problem of cyclists crossing Scarcroft Road, and that we do that as a separate piece of work. The other alternative, which, having listened to what people have said today and read the cycle campaign's comments, My instinct personally is that actually what we should do is go away and talk to everyone and bring you a report back on what a alternative route should be, because the cycle campaign's proposals are actually a slight variation from what's in the report and we discussed previously. So on that,
I mean, I don't know quite. Just to clarify, the Annex A is what's been signed off at the moment with the Environment Agency. Is that?
Yeah, that's their existing diversionary route at the moment, right. Which still requires that that right back on yourself turn off Scarcroft Road. But obviously, what the alternative route does is reduce the amount of time cyclists are on Scarcroft Road.
I mean, I think I would prefer to implement Annex B now. Obviously, maybe need to be further discussion about how that crossing point can be improved. But given the work's going to start next week, and I appreciate that there will still need to be a bit of time to negotiate that with the Environment Agency and their agents who have got the job of putting the signs out. So, I think rather than changing it, or rather than putting in something which is quite clearly not what people want, and given the constraints, the reason for looking at the crossing of Scarcroft Road at all is because of the parking constraints on either side of the road. And option A involves you going through a point which is, I had a look at it over the weekend, it's a point where there's parking on both sides of the road and vehicles going opposite directions have to take turns to go through in any case. But I think from the point of view of cyclists who are not so confident, the Millfield Road one would be preferable, particularly if we can later come up with something which is acceptable to improve it still further. But from the point of view of signing, I don't know whether, I can't remember what the cycle campaign said about once you've crossed for the St Benedict's Road versus the other route. But I mean, if we have to make a decision now, which obviously if it's changing next week, we do need to get it in place as quickly as we can.
I think just to be clear,
but, I mean, I realise it won't necessarily be in place for day one. But
as I've explained, we will need to go with the one that was approved through planning in the first instance.
Right.
We'll then work with planning colleagues, subject to your decision, but where I think you've said you're going, which is with the recommendations as per the report, which is that we will implement Annex B, the alternative, minus the Scarcroft Road element in terms of the crossing. We'll add that to the work programme and we'll come up with a report back to you as soon as we can, once we've had a chance to work through the issues that have been raised. And that we can obviously talk to the cycling campaign if that means a minor tweak elsewhere on the route, we can do that at the same time. Yeah,
I mean, I should say that, there are other cycle organisations as well that might have a view on this, but it's just that they are the ones who've made the representations to us about it. So I'm happy. So just to clarify, what you're saying is that we approve. So we're clear. We're approving option B, which needs some further discussion to vary what's been agreed.
The conditions. So we need to work with my planning team to redischarge those conditions.
Okay.
But we'll do that obviously in as timely a way, and then we'll sign that as quickly as we can, and then we'll work on any changes to. And then the other sort of enhancements sort of or whatever. More impact. I mean, to a certain extent, I did have a little script for this, but I was going to just say that the fact that we haven't been able to put it in place from day one will at least allow some feedback from people, from ward councillors. I mean, I should note, perhaps put on record that this arose not just out of representations from the cycle campaign, but the ward councillors
have been very much pushing for better crossing arrangements, and discussions ongoing over time about the first diversion route was going to be along New Walk on the opposite side of the river, but then it was pointed out that that means there's no really safe crossing of the river to get back for less confident cyclists. It would be either Scarcroft, Skelgate Bridge, or whatever. On that basis, I'm happy to do as you've suggested, and I think it's also perhaps worth mentioning that it does also give the ward councillors the opportunity, if they are minded to consult with residents, talk to residents from Millfield Road. I'm aware that there have in the past been some concerns about traffic that is not going to or from Millfield Road using that route in that very narrow point at the top of the hill. It may be that in consultation with residents and ward councillors, something can be done there as well to either make it one way or just cycles only, depending on what needs of local residents are for that particular location. It could be an opportunity for them to trial something over the course of a year while the work's going on the riverbank. So I'm going to move on. So thank you for that. Agenda item 11 is Kent Street petition. Do you want to say?
Yeah, so this was a petition presented by yourself to full council on the 29th of October last year, and that was in your role as the Fishergate ward member on behalf of the lead petitioner. The petition was for a zebra crossing at the junction of Fawcett Street and Kent Street. The petition had 371 signatories at the time it was presented to full council, but at the time of writing the report, it had 386. As is normal for a crossing request, the next step is for a formal crossing assessment as per DFT guidance prior to any changes being made to the junction. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, council officers have not been undertaking any crossing assessments over the past 12 months because the traffic flows and pedestrian flows are not representative of normal conditions, and therefore the results of any assessment could not be relied upon. And just to be clear, there's a bar to be met for certain types of crossing, and when your numbers are suppressed, you're not going to reach that bar, so it's not seen as fair to review it at the moment. We have looked at the current data sets we have, and whilst they're not in this exact location, they don't support a crossing. So therefore, the officer advises to add this location to a waiting list of schemes to have a formal assessment once the traffic levels allow. Officers will continue to monitor the nearby traffic levels until they reach the level which would have been expected based on the traffic trends between 2009 and 2019. Once that level has been reached, the relevant surveys will be commissioned and the assessment undertaken. The results of the assessment will determine the most appropriate improvements for that location. At that point, the scheme will be considered for further feasibility work to determine whether the most appropriate location would be and what measures could be physically accommodated. Any resulting proposals will be brought back to an executive member for a decision session to proceed to the implementation phase or not. Therefore, officer advises to acknowledge receipt of the petition and instruct officers to put the site through the assessment process when traffic conditions return to some form of normality.
Thank you. Well, I certainly support that option, as in having obviously declared an interest as a ward councillor, would like to see something happening here, as would anywhere in that sort of context. But I would also add that, as I understand it, the sort of schools are back to sort of normal operation now, so it may be that the pedestrian flows can be looked at, prior to the sort of traffic flows. I don't think they're necessarily going to change from one term to the next once we're back to full operation of the schools. But also ask that the head teachers at Fishergate and St George's School and the school travel plan officer are kept informed of the progress of this work. I understand it, the lead petitioner has children at Fishergate School, so it's obviously a matter of concern to the parents of children attending the school. We did have 2 school crossing patrols, which we don't have for those schools any longer. Although that's not directly relevant to this particular crossing, there's never been a crossing patrol for this particular junction. I would also just point out that consideration can also be given to use of Ward Highways budget if that's necessary to sort of support the progress of assessment and considering options for a junction. It is a busy junction, and there is actually a planning application which is sort of coming forward for a student accommodation near to that junction as well. So there will be more pedestrian traffic in the area in the foreseeable future, assuming that gets planning consent. So I'll move on now to agenda item 12, Slingsby Grove residence parking.
Okay, so this petition was received in December 2018 and presented to the executive member in February 19. And at that point, it was added to the waiting list. St Edward's Close petition was received in June 20, but due to the COVID situation, the petition was reported to the corporate director, and in consultation with yourself, St Edward's Close was added to the waiting list at the same time. Officers decided to consult both areas at the same time due to the close proximity of these locations. Officers also decided to consult Royal Chase, Kensington Court and Regency Mews, as there could be a displacement of parking if a scheme was implemented on Slingsby Grove. The properties and businesses of 64 to 90A Tadcaster Road were included in the consultation as they have access from Slingsby Grove and would be directly affected by any implemented scheme. We consulted in January 2021. 109 properties were consulted, 73 returned, 43 were against, that's 59%, and 30 were in favour, 41%. 13 of the 109 were St Edward's Close, 9 returned and 8 were in favour, 89%, and 1 was against, which is 11%. Objections were received from the business owners of Tadcaster Road regarding the impact on their businesses if the scheme was implemented. As the original petitions were received separately and the results were against in Slingsby Grove, Royal Chase, Kensington Court, Regency Mews and Tadcaster Road, but overwhelmingly in favour on St Edward's Close, the proposal is to implement on St Edward's Close only and to progress to the next stage of developing the legal changes and formal consultation process.
Thank you. Well, certainly it's encouraging to see the response rate was reasonably high, up to 92% in the case of Kensington Court. So we've got a representative view of residents in those areas, and as you said, St Edward's Close is physically separate from the rest, so there is a logic to going with the wishes of the residents for these proposals. On the comment about Slingsby Grove, I assume that from the report that some of the concerns of residents there was about parking associated with the businesses, which is why the businesses would be resistant to the change or concerned about the change. And I think it might be just worth noting that features such as cycle parking provision for business staff and customers might actually help reduce the sort of associated business parking in Slingsby Grove if we were able to encourage people who can use sustainable transport. And there's even some reference about someone parking to catch the coastliner bus to Leeds. Well, again, if it was somewhere safe for them to leave, cycle, or they could walk, that would be preferable. But in terms of the actual recommendations before us, yes, certainly would support implementation of St Edward's Close, which is the recommended option, but to take no further action on the other streets. Thank you. So that takes us to item 13, which is Fulford Main Street. Perhaps, I mean, it is noted in the report, but just to say, I didn't include in my declarations of interest that I did have a conversation with the petitioner some time ago with Councillor Aston as a ward councillor, just to try and identify what would be in the best interests of residents in the area. And I think the report we've got here probably does reflect that. So do you want to say anything about this?
Yeah, so I think first of all, just to say this would have been Sue Gill's last meeting if she could have been here today. Obviously, I'm presenting all her reports, so I'm possibly stealing her final thank you and goodbye from Sue Gill. So just to put that on record, I suppose. So in October 18, a letter was received by the residents of 5 to 11 Main Street, that's 5 properties, requesting addition to be added to a Res Park scheme. It's not usual practice to implement a scheme for such a small area, but it was decided to put this scheme onto the waiting list. It reached top of the waiting list in February 21. Of the 5 properties, we've got 100% return, with 3 properties in support, and 2 have changed their minds and are no longer in support. We consulted properties in the immediate area and no objections were raised from residents. The church has raised some concerns, and these we've tried to mitigate to some degree in the recommended option, which is option 2 of the report. The suggested option is to progress this to the next stage of developing the legal changes and formal consultation.
Thank you, and I note the concerns of the church, which included concern about sight lines, I think, wasn't it, which has been reflected in the design proposed to improve visibility for drivers coming out of their parking area. I'm happy to support this recommendation, but the only additional note I would say is whether we can consider I don't know whether this would be part of a scheme or separate things, some wooden bollards to protect the verge and reseeding of the verge, and mostly that would need to be in consultation with the ward councillors to what they feel is appropriate. But if that is something that is of concern, I believe.
We could talk to the ward councillors about that as a complementary ward scheme to be developed, delivered at the same time, potentially.
Yeah, I'm happy to suggest that as if that is something that they can cover, because reference was made to people parking on the verge because of the sight lines. So obviously, if we're addressing the sight lines, we don't need to allow that to continue. And it is an important part of the conservation area for Fulford Main Street. I think trying to improve the appearance wherever we can. And so I would also just like, as you said, to put on record our thanks to Sue Gill for her amazing contribution over the years in this quite difficult area, dealing with parking restrictions across the city. So I'd like to put on record our thanks to her contribution to City of York Council over the years. With that, I have no urgent business to address. So thank you and apologise for the length of the meeting. We did have quite a busy agenda and a lot of speakers. So thank you, everybody.